Several people have requested that we talk about how to check fluids on the vehicle. It's a fantastic request, and I couldn't think of any reason not to do it. So wanted to talk a little bit about this checking fluids before I actually demonstrated. Most modern cars you cannot check many fluids on. You can usually check the oil and you can usually check the brake fluid. Sometimes you can see if the car's got coolant in it, but most modern cars have electric power steering, so there's no fluid to check. The transmissions are sealed, so there's no dipstick, and there are a lot of plastic coverings around the engine. So we've got a perfect candidate here with shows all the old school fluids to check, and so hopefully you will get something from this and feel a little more comfortable navigating under the hood when you go to check the oil before that long trip. Toyota has intentionally, for many decades now, set the vehicle up to where you can essentially circumnavigate the front of the vehicle and check all of the fluids. So we can start over here on this fender, and we're going to check the power steering fluid. This is coolant, the coolant reservoir, the washer fluid. This is the radiator, which we're not going to take that off, and I'll talk about why. You've got your battery. Now, the battery does have a fluid in it, an electrolyte, commonly known as battery acid, which back in the old days, you could actually check that, but now all modern batteries are sealed, so it's really not an issue. And then lastly, over here, you have got, actually not lastly, there's two I missed. Over here, you've got your brake fluid, okay? So power steering fluid, there's actually two ways to check this. Visually without even touching it, and then there's actually a little dipstick on the end of this cap. So if you look down in here, you can see there's some lines that say min and max, and you can just kind of give it a little jiggle and watch the fluid move, and you've got a general idea. This plastic is made kind of transparent, translucent on purpose so that you can see the general fluid level. If you really want to get specific and check it and be exact, you want to do this with the vehicle off. The vehicle needs to be turned off. So you just like any regular dipstick, you wipe it off, and there's not really any markings on this. Basically what you're looking for, in your owner's manual will give you the details of what you need to look at. You just want the power steering fluid somewhere on this last little bit here. Okay, so you put it in, screw it all the way in after you've wiped it off, and you can see it's more than ample, you know, it comes up here into this range. So we're good there. All right, coolant. There are a couple of access points for coolant. One of them you do not want to open when the vehicle is hot. So I would just say avoid taking the radiator cap off, period. There's really no need unless you're having to put coolant in. If you're having to put coolant in, you got a problem. The car really needs to go to the shop. So all these vehicles have what's called a coolant reservoir, all right? And it's also known as an expansion tank. The reason they call it an expansion tank is because as the engine heats up and cools down, that coolant expands and contracts. So it's got to have somewhere to go. And all this does is just kind of hold it ready for when the radiator needs it, okay? So you can look in there, and it's a similar principle to the power steering fluid. There's no dipstick, but you can just kind of jiggle it, and you can see there is an F and an L, which you can probably figure out what that's for. But generally, when the vehicle is warm, you want it up near that full. Because of the expansion and contraction thing that I just talked about, it may read a little low when the car is cold, but that's no big deal. So really, the point is you want it in this range, okay? And this is a safe place to put coolant no matter what temperature the car is. If the car is hot, it's no big deal. If the car is cold, it's no big deal. You're not opening a pressurized vessel. You can just pop the cap off, pour the coolant in. As with any of these fluids, before you put anything into your vehicle, make sure it's the right thing. Toyota and Lexus take a very specific kind of coolant, and again, with any fluid, you'd want to consult your owner's manual, all right? So right next to it, we've got the washer fluid. Now, some older Toyota vehicles have a dipstick on the cap. I really don't see the point. When it comes to washer fluid, just dump it in until it's full. They do make this thing clear so you can kind of see. And if you look down in there, you can see the tank, and this whole neck is clear here, so you can see through it. And generally, washer fluid is going to be some color, blue, purple, green, I don't know what. But anyway, again, be careful of what you're putting in and where. But this is for washer fluid, and it will not hurt it to overfill it. You can absolutely fill it up till it runs out. It's not going to hurt anything, okay? So the two things that are very frequently checked, one is oil, one is transmission fluid. Now, most Toyota vehicles, the oil dipstick is going to be yellow, okay? Actually, that's true with just lots of vehicles in general. With oil, it's very simple. The car needs to be off. the engine needs to be off, and the vehicle needs to be sitting on a flat surface. My advice to folks is check this when you're at the gas station. The reason is because generally when you're getting gas, the concrete pad that you're parked on is going to be flat, all right? So you want the car level. So what you're going to do is, it helps to have a rag handy unless you know, don't care about your hands or your jeans. You just go ahead and grab this dipstick, all right? And regardless of what it says, just wipe it off. Just wipe it off. But I want you to notice something when you wipe it off. When you wipe it off, you're going to have some type of markings, all right? So this stick is upside down, obviously, but you're going to have two little marks. Now, some cars have little hash marks in there, you know, and there might be little writing on there telling you. There's none of that on here, but it doesn't matter. This is the bare basics you need. This is the range that the oil needs to be in, okay? So as long as the oil is in this range, the car, it's safe. It's got enough oil in it. If it's at this dot down here, generally, most vehicles, if you're at this lower dot, it takes about a quart to get you back up to this dot here. And that's not a hard and fast rule, that's just generality. Now, if you don't have any oil on your dipstick, check it again. Make sure you poked it in right. So we're just gonna put it in here, and you need to push it in all the way till it stops, okay? Pull it back out. Now, I realize I've held this dipstick upside down, but you don't wanna do that in this case. The cleaner the oil is, the harder it's gonna be to see. Now, that's the reason I'm tilting this dipstick back and forth, all right? And if you're unsure, find some light and look at it and let it reflect across that. Now, to me, what I'm seeing right now, I'm gonna check it with my fingers. To me, what I'm seeing is the oil level is perfect. It is just perfect. It's right up to that top dot. This needs no oil whatsoever. And you can even take your fingers and run it down, and it's dry and it's dry. Now I feel oil. So see the difference there, or I rub that off? All right, so no action needed on this car. Oil looks good, condition's good, and it's just the perfect level. So put that back in there. Transmission fluid, if the car has a dipstick, it needs to be running in idle. This is the only fluid that I can think of to check while the vehicle is running. Okay, so in park, idling, just running, and that's because it's a hydraulic system, and the level fluctuates wildly when the car is running. So for whatever reason, the engineers all decided the car needed to be running when it was checked. So, but while we're here, let's look at this dipstick. And on a Toyota or Lexus product, the dipstick is gonna have all kinds of writing all over it. And the reason for that, and it's even gonna have writing on the dipstick, which you can see very faintly, there's some writing. This is just telling you what kind of fluid to put in it. This takes a specific kind of fluid, kind of like the Coolant. Toyota and Lexus, you just don't go to the parts store and buy a generic fluid for these cars. Now, transmission fluid has a big range. And like I stated before, because it's hydraulic and because the fluid expands and contracts, if you look right there, you may not be able to see that, but it says cool, so that's your cool range, and that's your hot range. You notice there's two little notches. So those little notches are kind of represent the same thing that the two little dots on the oil dipstick did. In other words, in your cool range, like let's say the car was just dead cold, sat overnight, ambient temperatures, you crank it up, that transmission fluid should be down here. Now, after you've driven your car for a while and it's warm up to operating temperature, that transmission fluid should be up here. So just because you check it and it's down here, if it's cold or cool as it says, don't go adding fluid. You don't need to do that, because what's gonna happen is you're gonna get it hot and then you're gonna check it and that fluid is gonna be up here, okay? That's the kind of a walk around of the dipstick. And then also on Toyota and Lexus vehicles, the dipsticks are color coded. That doesn't generally mean anything to folks. That's probably more for the technicians, but this is the typical T-type color code. The battery. There may be some batteries out there that you can check electrolyte levels. Unless you have distilled water or electrolyte, there's really no point. So you're probably not going to see it, but if you do, I would just stay away from it, because the other issue is you got these caps you have to pry up, and when you get it loose, you're going to have electrolyte fly on your clothing or possibly in your eyes. And my advice would be avoid checking batteries, fluid levels, even if you can check it, just for safety. It's not really worth it. The last fluid on this car that we're able to check is the brake fluid. And there's not much you can do checking brake fluid other than a visual check. Again, the vehicle's off for all these checks except for the transmission fluid. And it's the same thing. You're just gonna jiggle it, and you can see up here it says max, and way down here it says min. So this thing's got a pretty big range of safe fluid. Now, it's normal for the fluid level to go down over time. It doesn't mean that you have a leak. What it means is, as your brake linings wear, in other words, as the brake pads get thinner and thinner, there's a hydraulic piston behind that pad that's being pushed by this fluid. Well, as the pad wears, that fluid fills that space, and that's where your brake fluid goes. So if you got brand new brakes on a vehicle, you top the fluid off, well, over time, it's gonna go down. Now that being said, you should always have it topped off. You should always top it off. So if you're having the car serviced regularly, go ahead and have it topped off. But it is okay if it's low, just a little low, not a big deal. Because the truth is, if you have a hydraulic brake leak, you're gonna have bigger problems and you'll know it. You'll see puddles and the brakes won't work right and that kind of thing. So yeah, real easy, just kind of jiggle it. Now with brake fluid, you need to be careful. If you are going to take the cap off and check it, this cap is actually a two-piece deal. It's got a vent in there, right? Because like we just said, that fluid is going down, you have to be able to let air in. You're always gonna have dirt. You're always gonna have some kind of crud on top. So what you wanna avoid doing is pulling that cap back and then the dirt falling in there. That's the last thing you want. So, you know, you don't need to clean it surgically, but just take a rag or something and just kind of give it a wipe, okay? Blow off the dust. And it's no big deal if a little gets in there, but you want to avoid getting any more than it has to. And you just carefully pull this back. If it's got fluid on it, it's going to flick into your eyes or on your clothing. So just pull it back, all right? And you set that aside. And what might look funny sometimes is you're going to see the bottom of the container with no fluid, and there's a little screen in there to protect dirt and debris. It's actually there to protect against the exact thing I just warned you about. This is just very normal. It's just a very light, you know, bit of dust. But sometimes if it's really caked up from some other source, you know, that's the last resort to keep it from going into your brakes. You just click that down on there and make it stay put. Again, this has been Matthew Durden of LexTechs of Atlanta. Thank you.